So the next locator that we are actually going to look at is getByTestId. Now, what is actually a test ID? This is basically an attribute on a specific on any tag which you can use to actually locate that particular web element, and it does not have any impact on the functionality of the web application or that specific tag. It's merely just used as an indicator or for the testing purpose in order to identify that particular element. Now, in order to create or identify an element with getByTestId, I'm quickly going to go through and then create that particular element. So let's say that the element name is actually a submit button, and let's give a tag called as button and submit. And let's now go and then select the identify by as test ID. Now here you can see in the info that the tag basically will have something like test data hyphen test ID. Now this is basically the tag or the attribute. Sorry, it's not a tag, it's an attribute that you would be using in order to identify that element. And the value of this have to be, for example, in this case, submit button. So now if I have to identify this div, I usually have to give here as submit hyphen button, which is nothing but the value of this data hyphen test ID attribute. Now, this is actually written by the developer. So as long as the developers have not given this test ID attribute, you might not be able to actually locate this with this locator. But there is also one more thing that it is also possible that it is not actually a data hyphen test ID, but it's a different kind of an attribute name that is used by your development team. In this case, on the global level, you have to actually tell the playwright that no, you should not use data-test ID, but the attribute of the test data identifier is different. In which case, in Playwright, normally you would configure this in profile. This is also possible in tacl. So, for example, here I'm using data-test ID submit button. So this would ideally work. But let's say that my developers are actually using a different name for this attribute. So what you can do is you can go to the execution profile, and when you're creating an execution profile, you have an option here to override the default attribute name of data test ID. So if it is not data test ID, let's say that if the name is called as test identifier, then you can actually give the attribute name over here. So which means that the developer has written in a way that in the tag, they would have written it as test hyphen identifier is equal to submit button. But in most of the cases, that might not be the case. But just in case if the attribute name is different, you have an option to override this in the execution profile. And that is how you actually identify an element by test ID and create that web element in tacl.